Death toll rises from the floodwaters in eastern Australia.
Free after 1,000 days, a hostage heads for home.
Another British prison riot, the authorities take a pounding.
And Wellington's gala night for Save the Children's royal president.
One Network News with Lindsay Perigo and Campbell.
Good evening. The death toll has risen to 4 in the worst floods ever to hit eastern Australia.
In the New South Wales town of Nyngan, a wall of sandbags built by locals to keep out the floodwater appears to have failed, threatening the 2,000 residents. Here's our Australian correspondent, Craig McMurtry.
The Nyngan flood siege has been a tale of courage and determination, but now it appears the small community's 4-day battle has been lost. Earlier today, the town's sandbag wall was leaking, with entire families working frantically shoulder to shoulder, filling thousands of sandbags. The 2,500 locals are prepared for the worst, and evacuation centres been set up in the middle of town. In East Gippsland, there was a narrow escape for a family when their car was swept away in floodwaters. 2 adults and 2 children clung to the roof of a station wagon as a farmer went to their rescue on a tractor.
These guys, well, they got more guts than I did. We was only there because we had to be. These guys were there because they wanted to be. They wanted to help us.
In the Queensland town of Charleville, the water subsided today, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Homes were ripped off foundations, rail lines in and out of town were left buckled and twisted. It was worse than many could have imagined.
The town rebuilt, get people working out here, the West will survive, otherwise the whole place is dead. I'm just pleading to any politician that can hear me tonight that you've got to listen to what I'm talking about. Get something moving fast, because people out here are losing heart. They just want to know what they're going to do.
With so much of the town destroyed, many of the people here won't be able to begin rebuilding their lives for some time yet. Craig McMurtry, One Network News.
Hopes are mounting tonight after hints from Iranian sources that a second American hostage will be released later this week. An American professor was today set free by his pro-Iranian kidnappers after spending more than 1,000 days in captivity in Lebanon. 55-year-old Robert Polhill arrived in West Germany a few hours ago from Syria for medical checks at a US military base in Wiesbaden. He said shortly after his release that his treatment had been good, but he could only speak in a low voice because his captors had refused to let him speak in anything other than whispers during his 3 years in captivity. Polhill was handed over to Syrian forces and taken to Damascus for an emotional reunion with his wife.
Robert Polhill with his Lebanese wife, Faraya, for the first time for 3 years.
Great! Yes! Great, I'm very happy. Yes, I'm coming. Okay.
She had walked the streets of West Beirut where she lived, knowing her husband could be held anywhere, and she was powerless to secure his release. Indeed, it was in West Beirut that Mr. Polhill was handed over. In a fleeting, sinister moment, he is transferred from the back of one car and taken to another. Freedom secured in a second. A tired, gaunt man, formerly a professor at Beirut University College, gets his first view of the outside world for 39 months. In Syrian hands, he then prepared for a 2-hour drive to Damascus.
You are now in safe hands, sir.
And in this interview attempts to explain how he lived through such an horrendous ordeal.
Well, we were pretty much in the dark on news. We did have reading material. We got books occasionally, not frequently, not nearly enough for college professors to read because we read very fast. But news, no. Very, very, very rarely did we see any newspaper. There wouldn't be any English language newspapers for us to read much in Lebanon anyway.
Later, the Syrians presented him at this press conference at their foreign ministry. They had mediated, they had negotiated, but nothing was apparently handed over, cash or otherwise, for Polhill's release. It seems to have been a gesture of goodwill from the Iranian-backed kidnappers.
Later in the programme, we'll be talking to one of Washington's leading advisors on the Middle East. Dr. Robert Hunter worked with the Carter administration in trying to resolve the 1980 hostage crisis and is now part of an influential Washington think tank.
Yet another British jail has been taken over by rampaging prisoners. This time it's a remand centre near Bristol. Over 100 inmates took over the Puckle Church Centre, starting fires and laying waste to the buildings. The riot began when a group of inmates seized a prison officer, shut him in a cell and used his keys to release the rest of the prisoners.
Around 40 climbed onto the roof, from where they hurled missiles and abuse at more than 100 police in protective gear who'd surrounded the perimeter fence. Early this morning, prison officers with shields to protect them moved into the prison yard. There they were attacked by groups of men throwing missiles. After 20 minutes, the prison officers withdrew, but the authorities have made it clear they don't intend to sit this disturbance out. What's caused the disturbance isn't clear. Problems of overcrowding are said not to be serious. It's thought the inmates were simply copying riots elsewhere.
Meanwhile, at Strange Ways prison, where rioting first broke out, a hard core of inmates is still holding out after 23 days.
The company associated with the America's Cup Challenge, Faye Richwhite, is going public. Faye Richwhite will get a stock exchange listing after a merger with its subsidiary, Capital Markets, a major shareholder in the BNZ. The merger comes at a time of share market concern at the size of Capital Markets' debt ratio. Michael Wilson reports.
The merger doesn't mean the public can invest directly in Faye Richwhite's America's Cup Challenge or in the Faye Richwhite Tower in Auckland. These are the personal investments of Measures Faye and Richwhite. What the public can invest in is Faye Richwhite's merchant banking operations, which are being merged into the Capital Markets Group.
Well, we've done a lot as a private company. We've generated good profits. We want to set our sights higher. We want to increase our role in the international markets. Can we do that as a private company? And the decision was no. The growth ahead, the profit opportunities lie as a public company.
The merger comes at a time of share market scepticism about the financial health of capital markets. A leading Auckland share broker, Henry Hay McIntosh, told its clients this month to sell Capital Markets because of its high level of debt. The share brokers say debt soared after Capital Markets' $300 million investment in the BNZ. Michael Fay, however, disagrees.
Capital Markets has always been very conservatively geared and very conservatively geared around the BNZ investment. One or two people, I think, have failed to understand what the board have done.
If shareholders agree to the merger, the Capital Markets name will be changed to Faye Richwhite. And if punters believe Faye and Richwhite will win their America's Cup Court Challenge, it could become a popular share. Michael Wilson, One Network News.
There's a new twist tonight in the ongoing saga over Air New Zealand's efforts to fly its new long-range superjets. The Pilots Association has warned it'll take legal action unless Air New Zealand withdraws its contract offers by midday tomorrow. Air New Zealand recently announced plans to offer pilots individual contracts in a bid to break opposition to the new 747-400 aircraft.
The teenager charged with the murder of Auckland mother Katy Junge has been granted interim name suppression. The unemployed 17-year-old made no plea when he appeared in the Auckland District Court today. The youth has been remanded in custody for a psychiatric report and will appear in court again in 2 weeks. Katy Junge was beaten to death on Wednesday night, but her body wasn't discovered until Friday. The woman's 13-month-old daughter was found unharmed but trapped in her cot.
And more than a year after the disappearance of 2 Swedish tourists, a judge has begun hearing evidence about their alleged murder. The Crown will call more than 100 witnesses in the depositions hearing to decide if David Tamahiri should stand trial for the murders of Heidi Parkinen and Urban Hoglin. Today, Tamahiri was under tight security and quickly whisked away from public view. It's only the 3rd case in New Zealand where police have laid charges without finding a body.
About 600 angry Auckland ratepayers tonight demanded that local government amalgamation be scrapped. They say it's hitting ratepayers where it hurts most, in the pocket. Their new authority, North Shore City, plans a rate increase of nearly 22%, and that's upset residents who made their feelings clear at a noisy meeting. Kim Webby was there.
East Coast Bay's residents were spoiling for a fight when they met over big rate rises.
If you can't afford, you don't have.
Rates for an average East Coast Bay's home will cost $1,250 this year, up from $980 last year, a 22% rise. Residents blame it on local government amalgamation, and thousands have signed a petition against it.
Well, mainly the citizens of East Coast Bays want to revert back to a single council.
Councillors agreed that amalgamation's been costly and blamed the government, but ratepayers weren't appeased.
Sit down before you embarrass yourself.
A superannuitants group even suggested a rates boycott. Kim Webby, One Network News.
Tributes have poured in for one of New Zealand's leading entertainers, Lou Prime, who died today from an AIDS-related illness. Prime was well known for his work as a promoter, singer and rugby director, in a career which spanned nearly 3 decades.
I remember him as a great friend, a great entertainer and a great leader in whatever he did.
Over the past 2 years, Prime was fighting a private battle with AIDS. His final role will be in a documentary on the illness.
And in Auckland tonight, the AIDS Foundation launched a free handbook on learning to live with HIV. The foundation says there's still concern about the lack of counselling and support offered to people with the AIDS virus. Greg Ward reports.
Conservative estimates suggest more than 3,000 New Zealanders will be diagnosed with HIV in the next 2 years. To date, more than 162 AIDS cases have been reported. However, 3 times that number have been found to be HIV positive, which means they've had contact with the virus but won't necessarily develop AIDS. Now, a free handbook is available offering information and advice as well as hope. At its launch, Dame Kath Tizard urged those at risk to be more open with those around them.
You can't confront what isn't admitted, and that's why it is so important for all sorts of people in all walks of life to help create a society which faces up to AIDS.
The AIDS Foundation says inadequate support and counselling for people with HIV means most consider suicide soon after diagnosis. Whether they attempt it depends on how and what they are told.
I was rung by my GP at work and given my diagnosis over the telephone. But, not many people are given diagnoses of life-threatening illnesses in that sort of way. It showed a great deal of insensitivity.
Michael Hay says in some cases the diagnosis has been passed on to a third party and not the person concerned. There's also concern about issues of non-consent testing, where hospitals have gone ahead and tested, then forwarded the results. Greg Ward, One Network News.
Coming up, one of President Carter's Middle East advisors talks to us about the release of a hostage today in Lebanon.
As President Bush finds himself performing a delicate balancing act.